kind of my setup as a total beginner trying to get push notifications with Firebase in iOS. This is basically started with a tutorial for a chat app. Uh, Found my own way through Firebase, wanted to add push notifications. The push notifications are what we're going to focus on here. Uh, Obvious caveat, don't know what I'm doing, and as a result, have no room to complain about how sort of obtuse this process is, but I'm going to do it anyway. Okay, so, basic chat app or whatever. So you would expect when you open it up and you tiddly diddly dee and you press enter, then basically it tells the other app, like, pop this up on the other screen. Let's find out. The real process mirrors that. So basically what I had to do was first I had to go into trusty Xcode here, and you gotta tell it, like, I want to do push notifications and stuff. Once you've done that, you also got to get into Firebase, and they got their own thing in here so that you're gonna get messages from Firebase, and then you got to generate all your keys or whatever from Apple, tie all that up. So that's a whole thing. Once you got that going, here's basically what you want to do. So here's the app delegate. They're kind of in charge of the whole thing. You got to make sure you're using a new enough version of iOS. You can ignore all this for now. You're going to get another guy who can handle the notifications. Now, before we move out of here, let's see if there's any other. This is related to getting messages. And most of the other stuff I moved out of there. So let's take a look at that guy. I moved a lot of the notification stuff out of there. Okay, this is some information for other guys that are going to help the helper. Basically, what we got going on here is we gotta handle these messages by hand. Is what I'm trying to get at. Basically, anytime I get a message, I'm going to send that message to whichever view is in front, and it's going to figure out how to handle it. And that's kind of all this code does. Let's move on. This is an extension to the real Apple baked-in notification center. But I had to write these methods. They all kind of work together to do the same thing. Basically, when you tap on a notification, I need it to remove anything that's related to that notification, like if you got 5 messages to the same room, and that's what all these ones do, plus an extra bonus one that counts the badge on the app icon down by 1, which has a special use there. Right, there is also this class that deals specifically with badges because, as we'll see later, the notification and the little red number on the app icon aren't as related as you would expect. There is a special file that's keeping track of every chat room as well as how many unread messages it has. That's what this is about. So if you see user defaults or plist, that's reading from our little sort of like inside file or tiny database locally. And these are just methods that get the number on the app icon and add or subtract as necessary. That's what this does. We also have another extension here because you can't always change the badge the way you would like, blah, 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 blah. Let's move on. Okay, we're going to pop out of Xcode for a minute here. Basically, the process that happens is when you send this message, it creates a document, basically an entry in a database over here. So we break down by the room, and then it's got some messages in it, and here's each of the messages. Let's look at people's messages. Okay, so this message gets created. When you actually send a message in the app, all it does is create this document. But Firebase on the back can listen for document creation. So we're going to go into Visual Studio here. And this is TypeScript, basically JavaScript. So this says every time we get a new message, you got to get the name of the sender, you got to get the message itself, And then you got to get that sender's information because we actually get them by ID. Then you need to check this list over here of participants. Those are the people who are in the chat. And then for each of them, you have to go to their individual user account and get what's called a token. Let's see if we can find that in Xcode. So let's say you've got an iPhone and an iPad. You would expect when you get a message on the service that the message would pop up on both of your devices. But basically, Firebase doesn't really know about your devices. It only knows about your user account. And Apple only knows about your devices, but not your user account. So when you give permission to see notifications, which happens in somewhere. I lost my own thing. Well, it's in there somewhere. Permissions, there it is. Yeah, here. This is when you open the app, it's going to ask you, can I send pop-ups? Can I send notifications? And as long as you say yes, it creates this token, as we can see here. And the token gets sent to, basically we ask Apple for a token, Apple stores the token also gets sent to Firebase, and then associated with your user ID. So if you have multiple devices, you're going to have multiple tokens. Fun little fact, because the token is associated with the device, not with the user, anytime they sign out, we got to remove that token. Otherwise, someone who's used the same device but on a different ID is going to still get push messages for a different account on the same device. So there's also more TypeScript here that handles that case. Anyway, moving back. So once we get all the tokens for the people in those chats, we actually create the push message. So we see we got to manually create this. We got to include the vibration. We got to do some, we let it know which room it came from. That's going to be important later, as well as this category, also important later. And then some truly sticky stuff, mutable content. This lets us actually change the notification on the device. We'll see why that's important later. And you'll see badge 1. Now what's important here is not that this is adding to the badge with 1. It's literally saying change the app's badge to 1 because you can only set a number. You can't increment it, which might seem weird because it is. And we'll come back to that later as well. And here's all the code that tries to actually send the messages and does error handling and all that stuff. That is the back-end code to push a notification. So we are done with the TypeScript now. All right, when the notification comes in, we have a few seconds to modify its contents. That was why we had to include that mutable content string. So basically what we do is we use that method I showed earlier to find the current badge number on the app, and we increment it by 1. None of that's automatic. The app doesn't automatically count how many notifications you've got. You have to set the badge number every single time. And of course, you might be wondering, well, what about when people open messages, blah, blah, blah. We'll see how to handle that as well. Okay, so we've basically got 2 views in the app that are important for push notifications. You have the chat room, which we saw earlier, and there is also the user list, which doubles as kind of a list for all the available rooms, spinning around because this MacBook is quite fast. Yeah, basically this is your chat room and this is your list of rooms, which is better to show here. Unfortunately, because this is the simulator, we won't be able to see it, but in a proper device, you also see an unread count right here in orange, which I suppose looks a little bit like this. It looks like a more beautiful version of this weird diamond 0. And again, that's something we have to code on our own. So let's jump in there. All right, this context list, this is what we saw here. Okay, so when we send a message, it gets pushed to that database we saw here. This TypeScript handles sending message about it. It goes through Apple's server, which then gets pushed to our device. The app delegate has already told that we are going to use the notification center, which itself has a delegate, which is this notification handler, which in turn has delegates, which are our contacts in chat view. So let's see what the chat view does when it gets a message. So we have a few different methods related to this, but let's first get this one. Okay. So when we get a notification, we need to do a couple things. Because if your app is in the foreground when you get the notification, it doesn't show up by default. We have to provide methods for how the app should handle it. In my case, I force it to show the pop-up anyway in most cases, except if we're in the chat view, which means I don't want to make the notification pop up because we can already see the chat. But we have to update the badge and we have to vibrate. So we have separate methods for that, badge count, and this back button one, which we'll talk about a little bit later too. We also have to handle if we tap on a notification, which means we want to move to the chat room in question. So all that kind of gets handled here. And there's plenty of callback methods to sort of update the view whenever you get messages. Ugh. All right, what else have we got here? Oh, let's move into the chat room. So this is also a delegate, which can handle when a message comes in. Same method here. Oh no, we cleared that one out. Right, okay. So if we get a message, we need to check if we're actually looking at that chat because we don't want to pop up in ourselves, in which case we do nothing. But otherwise, we kind of override the options in the chat list view, and we want to include showing an alert. And that's kind of the basic stuff here. I skipped over a lot of the implementation because this is already pretty long. But what are we missing here? What are we missing? We've definitely got some important stuff we haven't talked about. Actually, that's all that comes to mind at the moment. I guess that's kind of it. The takeaways we want to get from this are that sending the push notification has to add the message to the database, then go through the TypeScript, which generates a message, which goes to Apple's server, which then pushes to your devices based on tokens, which then from the app delegate passes to the notification center, which passes to the handler, which then passes to its delegates, and it's only there that we decide what number are we going to get on the badge. What is the push notification actually going to say? And I just remembered the last couple of things we wanted to talk about, which were these weird settings that we had to set in here. So we already did the mutable content. That's so we can actually show an accurate badge count. This one, thread ID and category. Now these are just kind of like aesthetic things, but let's take a look at them anyway. So as mentioned, we can't see it here, but you get a little notification over there when you get a message. And that is, yeah, so you can see we have to do some methods here which update the badge number for each individual account. Luckily, most of this is hidden behind other methods, which we don't really need to get into. Oh, there's this fun little back button item. Again, we can't see this on the simulator, but this will show the number of unread messages total, and you'd think that you could modify this right in this room, but you can't. This actually belongs to this guy. And fun fact, this is not a mutable object. So we actually have to delete it and remake it every time a message comes in. Can't even find the method, but it's in there somewhere. It's definitely in there somewhere. There it is. Yeah. You gotta remake it with the new number. I'm getting tired just talking about this. Let's see. Last thing. I think this is currently an app delegate. Yes, it is. So this is what all this mess is about. When a message comes in, we want to, again, unfortunately I can't show this, but these days, on iOS in the newer versions, if you get several messages from the same, say, person, it groups them together. That's why we need to have this thread ID, room ID, alternately called. That lets them group together. Fortunately, that part's fairly automatic, but there's also usually a little subtitle at the bottom of that notification that says, like, 3 more notifications from FaceFace. So we have to do that part manually. So we want to categorize each of them as a message, and we want to say it's this many from that person. That part's not automatic, and we also have to deal with plurals. This is where you could translate it, but I'm only using English, so we have to do it here. We need to make a special string case for the word message. So this U is a number, more message or more messages from, and this represents the username, and all of that is handled in here. And with that simple modification to your app, when someone sends a doobly-doo, that doobly-doo will show up for you.